Greetings, friends. My name is Charlie Kincaid, and welcome to the show. In my estimation, Frasier is the greatest sitcom to grace the small screen. Whereas a show like Seinfeld turned the conventions of the sitcom on their head, Frasier accepted the conventions and perfected them. And so it was with great excitement and caution I anticipated the revival. I knew they couldn't catch lightning in a bottle twice, but it could still suffice if it achieved just two things. One, be serviceably funny, and two, not undermine the original. When word came out that the original cast would not return, I, like most fans, was disappointed. As Frasier developed, the show's success relied less on its star and more on its supporting cast, especially David Hyde Pierce and John Mahoney. However, with Mahoney's death and Pierce's absence, the new series would need to develop a new paradigm. This provided its greatest source of potential and also its greatest risk of failure. Finally, the show premiered. The new Frasier is premised on Frasier's attempt to reconcile with his semi-estranged son Freddie. Having dropped out of Harvard to pursue a life as a firefighter, Freddie has followed more in the footsteps of his blue-collar grandfather, who has just passed away. Many have criticized the decision to have Freddie abandon academic life, including former Frasier writers. However, I thought it actually made sense. Freddie's last few appearances in the original show demonstrates an adolescent more interested in hanging out with friends and pursuing girls than reading Walden on a camping trip with his father. What's more, it provides a nice thematic symmetry with the original series. Frasier does feel noticeably absent in his son's life, and so it stands to reason, after reconciling with his own father, he would want to do the same thing with his son. Frasier's motivations are strong and well-defined. From there, it gets a little hazier. Besides Freddie, the new cast includes Frasier's heretofore unmentioned best friend Alan, a psychology professor at Harvard, Olivia, the chair of Harvard's psychology department, Eve, Freddie's roommate, and David, Frasier's nephew and Harvard student, the son of Daphne and Niles. In any story, but especially in an episodic sitcom, the supporting characters must have clearly defined and indispensable relationships with the main character. That's why they show up in every episode. Taking the original series as an example, Martin moves in with Frasier when it becomes clear he cannot live alone. That leads to the inclusion of the live-in physical therapist Daphne. At work, he has a producer, Roz, who is necessary for the operation of his show, and finally he has a brother, his closest confidant. These are his immediate circle. Other characters like the KACL crew provide some color to the world but aren't necessary for the success of every episode. For another example of this dynamic, there's the curious case of Bulldog, a recurring character that was briefly promoted to the supporting cast in the 4th season. Despite the promotion, Bulldog was still rather dispensable. In other words, his absence wouldn't have necessarily been felt, and indeed his absence was not particularly felt when the character disappeared for the greater part of 2 seasons. In the new series, this immediate circle dynamic basically ends with Freddie and Alan. Freddie moves in with Frasier, and Alan serves as a kind of Niles surrogate. Olivia, Eve, and David frequently have little consequence in the stories. Olivia operates as a kind of Kinney-type character in the sense that she has authority over Frasier but supplies little else. Eve's most prominent role was in the first episode when she was Freddie's roommate, but as soon as Freddie moves in with Frasier, her necessity in the story is subordinated. And finally, there's David, who, although being Frasier's nephew and student, often feels randomly inserted into scenes to remind the audience he exists, which brings me to another point. Of all the elements of the series, the one which makes least sense and requires the most suspension of disbelief is that Harvard would be so eager to hire Frasier as a new psychology professor. Frasier had an eminent education, of course, but his professional life diverged far from academic research. It would be as if Harvard were clamoring for Dr. Phil, and no matter how well-spoken or how charismatic Frasier is, it's unlikely he would be sought after as a professor in the Ivy League. These are structural problems with the new Frasier. Other than his relationship with Freddie, they do not feel like an organic outgrowth of his new position in life. And while I'm certainly not a professional sitcom writer, after spending a little time thinking, I attempted to imagine how the new Frasier could potentially resolve these structural issues. Frasier's show, Dr. Crane, has ended. Charlotte left him and his father has just passed away. It's a time of transition for Frasier. Confronting these changes in his life and regretting how he's left things with his son, he decides to settle back in Boston to be closer to Freddie. Freddie keeps him at arm's length, and Boston is full of ghosts. This was the last place he lived before becoming famous, but the old gang at Cheers isn't there anymore, and he can't go anywhere without being recognized. Now everywhere he goes, everyone knows his name, but no one really knows the man. He feels alone and untethered. He spent most of his adult life cultivating an image of sophistication only to become the worst kind of TV tabloid host and is no longer taken seriously as an intellectual. It's in this frame of mind he reaches out to an old friend, Alan, a psychology professor at Harvard. Realizing he misses the camaraderie with Alan, he has an idea to start up a more stripped-down podcast where he and Alan can discuss psychology and interview prominent academics. Hoping to have a sparse, unpolished ambiance, he procures Eve, Freddie's roommate, and an aspiring actress to produce the show and run its social media. She agrees, thinking the project could give her some exposure. Olivia, worried about the potentially salacious subject matter, will only let Alan participate in the show on the condition she monitors the production. The podcast is moderately successful, and Frasier and Alan have a friendly Siskel and Ebert-type combativeness. Meanwhile, to satisfy his personal and professional ambitions, Frasier buys Freddie's apartment building and uses it both as his new home and new studio. Freddie continues living with Eve, refusing to accept Frasier's invitation to live in his apartment. Instead, Frasier offers a room to David, who acts as a kind of mediator between Frasier and Freddie. I spent maybe an hour thinking about this idea, and admittedly it has weaknesses. Olivia was hard to weave into the supporting cast. She probably isn't any better off than she was in the actual series. It would probably be just better to relegate her to a recurring character. Also, Frasier probably needs someone more able to throw him off his high horse. Still, the characters have a greater participation in Frasier's life, and his professional life now mirrors his personal life. That is, he's trying to reclaim his credibility not only as a father, but as an intellectual. Although the series leaves much to be desired, it's not necessarily bad. The episodes seem to improve as the series progressed. It succeeded at its central conflict, the Freddie-Frasier relationship, and while the characters often seem untethered, they're mostly enjoyable. The comedy is spotty, but a good percentage of the jokes do land, and so, in this sense, my two conditions mentioned previously are successful. The show does not undermine the premise of the original series, and it does have serviceable comedy. The quality of the original series began to falter around its 8th season, and seasons 9 and 10 are almost unwatchable other than a few gems. This new season is better than those two, and hopefully it's given enough time to secure its footing. Given the dearth of quality comedies in the present TV landscape, even a Frasier not firing on all cylinders is a welcome change of pace. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and all that. And I'll see you next time.